Welcome to Friendship Simulator, a podcast where two Twitter friends recommend media in the hopes that the other will like it. This week, we discuss Jen Wang's Stargazing and our collective experiences of biculturalism, diaspora, and otherness. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Leyla.
And Leyla, this week you gave me the task of reading, as I said, Jen Wang's Stargazing. It's about a 200-page comic that's actually like more middle grade. The rating is like 8 to 12 years old. I'll give a quick summary. It's basically the story of two Asian girls who live in, I'm pretty sure it's LA, because at one point they go out to that planetarium. And it's the story of how they meet, how they become friends, how they fall out of being friends, and then they repair their friendship at the end, which is always cool. But it is really a story that's about, what middle school is like, as well as like the weird relationship that people, especially the people who are children of immigrants, have in the United States. And I think that's why you wanted to recommend it, because Stargazing, for some context, the protagonist Christine, I think she's like 11 or 12, and she's like half Chinese, half Taiwanese was my read, and she has to navigate this weird dynamic, because when this new friend, her friend Moon Lin, moves in to like her, basically it was like the apartment next to their house where their grandpa was living before he passed. Moon is like, I think she's also Chinese. It doesn't, I don't think it states it explicitly what like ethnicity or race she is, but the way that Moon is raised by her mom is kind of a different cultural experience from the way that Christine grows up. And it's very interesting, and it's a very complicated dynamic for a book that's aimed at like sixth graders, and I really liked it. It was a genuinely great book, and they explore so many interesting aspects of diaspora and biculturalism, just in the fact that like Moon, despite like nominally being the same ethnicity and race as Christine, has such a different way of moving through the world, and they explore the friction that comes in those sort of relationships. So I've got some questions for you, and feel free to just navigate those questions as you will and go off on tangents, because this one I didn't, I felt like this one, because it's a little bit of a shorter text, it's not 66 episodes of an anime, there's a little bit less to dig into, but I think we're still going to have a pretty good conversation. So firstly, what made you want to recommend this graphic novel?
So, I mean, like you said, it's not 66 episodes of Boruto. So I wanted to give us a bit of lighter material, but two, you and I have this, what I would refer to as like an adjacently similar cultural experience, in the sense of like we're bicultural, and, one of your parents is an immigrant, or both of your parents were immigrants?
Yes, yeah. So my mom is an immigrant from Singapore, although she is racially Indian. And my dad is like a German American. He's like his family has been in America for like 4 generations, maybe 3, but like they're all, Germans. There's a big section of the Midwest that's all like German colonized. So that's my racial background. So I'm half white, but half Indian.
Yeah, it's an American smorgasbord of just mixed ethnicity. But yeah, so there's that, and then I'm also an immigrant, so we have this like adjacent experience of growing up in not quite either world, especially because my sort of ethnic background, I was thinking about this, and it's incredibly layered, because my family, ethnically, the family that I grew up with is Armenian, but because of who my dad is, I'm mostly Azerbaijani. And then my mom had to flee the war in the 80s out of Azerbaijan, so she had to assimilate to Russia, which is when I was born. So I got this weird Armenian Azerbaijani cultural experience raised by a mother who was desperately trying to assimilate to the Russian lifestyle. And then following that, we both emigrated to America and then had to assimilate here. So my whole shit is confused. But in terms of the book, I really thought that we could we've been talking about so much media about kids that is not necessarily targeted at kids. I wanted to see what your reaction will be to something that speaks directly to the age group it's representing, and if it changed the way you look back on kind of your middle school experience at all.
As far as, my middle school experience, I had what I assume is everyone's middle school experience, which is like very intense and kind of bad. You are just hitting puberty at that age, and you feel everything more intensely, and you start developing your personality. And we see that in the way that Christine and Moon sort of like get into their various their K-pop, and they the ways they define themselves. As far as what how I relate, basically like the way that I did middle school is mostly just trying to keep my head down and not draw any attention to myself. And I don't know that this changed the way that I thought about my own middle school experience, except for the fact that like I don't know who said this, but I didn't come up with this, but basically someone, probably a podcaster, was talking about how the friendships you make in middle school are often a lot more like personal and intense than like some of the friendships you make at any other time in your life. Well, you can look to what's that Stephen King book where it's like the kids and they're trying to find a body. Stand By Me is the movie. But like that's an example of like the kind of friends you make when you are in that like sixth grade. Like are you feel like very close to them. Like I can remember when I was probably in fourth grade and going into fifth grade, and like the guy I considered to be my best friend at the time wasn't going to be in like my fifth grade class, and I was just like sobbing because I was so distraught about it. Yeah, like so I like the way that Stargazing portrays friendships in that way in sixth grade, where they're both very intense and also like complicated because there are a lot of dynamics going on about like how kids feel, because they sometimes you don't completely understand your own feelings, as we get into what Christine does to hurt Moon. And so do you that's kind of a rambling answer to your question, but yeah, how did you process this as in context of your middle school experience?
I think it helped me be a little bit nicer to my middle school self, in the sense that I mean, I'm a product of what I grew up as, which is I was just a theater kid and I wanted everybody to like me. And
yep.
I was like an A+ student and a teacher's pet. I was an old soul growing up. Like I was always, I really took the girls are more mature thing to heart, and I was a mess. But there were definitely things I thought about when I was reading this book. When we were talking on Twitter, you mentioned specifically the birthday party scene being really tense, and that birthday party scene rings really hard for me because I had accidentally done something at my birthday party when I was turning 16, which is like a little bit older than this target demographic. But I had done something and I accidentally hurt somebody in a way that I completely didn't mean to. I was just stupid and didn't think before I opened my mouth. And it was so bad that her mom brought it up to me like a year and a half later, and I still think about it to this day, and I feel so bad. And it was a result of it wasn't anything like I didn't
you didn't punch her in the face,
anything, but I didn't punch her in the throat. But it turned out basically that and this was a circumstance of not really anything the girl had done. She's always been really sweet. She's a delightful young woman now, as far as I know. But we weren't quite as close as everybody else, as I was as close to everybody else there. And so I had kind of invited everybody else to spend the night and not her. And I didn't realize she was the only one I didn't make that distinction with. And so she ended up finding out, and I'm having trouble getting through the story because I feel terrible about it to this day. And so rereading this book yesterday, it really brought that memory back up. But like you pointed out the moment where all you can do is grow from the things you've done. So, it just helped me kind of look back with a little bit of a kinder light. And I also think it's really interesting you brought up the intensity of the friendships, because I don't know what copy of The Prince and the Dressmaker, which is another Jen Wang book, her first book, I believe. But in the back of The Prince and the Dressmaker, there's a little bit of a making of section. And Sebastian and Frances were originally supposed to be adults, but she aged them down because she thought that experience of self-discovery and those relationships would be more intense for teens. So I think it's really interesting that you picked up on that, because it's definitely in her oeuvre, and it's definitely her authorial intent, at least in the other book, by way of her explicitly stating that. But I just thought it was really interesting that you picked up on that, because that is part of the thing that I think makes this book so charming, is like these little, what we would consider kind of inconsequential slights are so intense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely situations I can remember, like shitty things I said that I still like wake up at night in cold sweats. Like, why did I say that when I was 11 years old? That's nothing, you fool, you buffoon. And I'm glad that we both have terrible situations in which we did people dirty.
Yeah.
Do you so like, when as a comic writer yourself, do you want to like dive into your craft corner real quick before we get into the cultural section?
You know what's funny is I don't have much of a craft corner for this, because I think we should make it clear that though you very flatteringly call me a comic book writer, I've made 20 pages of a webcomic and I'm redoing 13 of them because I've learned so much about the very specific visual language of comics, and I still have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I'm flipping through Stargazing right now, and the layouts are really simple, but it's still stuff I wouldn't think to do on my own. Especially, I really like the style switching she does with Moon's kind of visions.
Yeah.
I think it's a really neat traditional way of approaching that kind of illustration, and it reminds me of my friend who is also she's an actual professional comics artist. Her name is Janice. Shout out Janice. And she also does these very like traditionally inspired illustrations. But I think my favorite thing about Jen Wang, and this is dating back to Prince and the Dressmaker, which I have a signed copy of because I loved it so much. I like when I got to meet her at Stable Comic Con, and she was absolutely just the sweetest woman alive. But Jen Wang does this thing that I really hope I either am doing or can grow to do in my art, which is she has these incredibly tender moments that are so memorable. There's a part in Stargazing where Moon is gearing up for surgery and she makes eye contact with Christine through a window.
And it's just like brutal, and then like Christine is like hiding because she's upset with Moon and she doesn't want to see, and she like, there's just like this darkness, the contrast of Moon just staring up at that window that's closed, and Christine just like hiding in her room. It's so cutting, and
Moon's face is just so heartbreaking. And there's another one in Prince and the Dressmaker where Sebastian is looking out from behind a curtain towards the end, and you can blatantly see like Frances is in love with him, and it's this silent, like, perfect moment. And that's what I'm really drawn to in her work. And I literally pre-ordered Stargazing without knowing what it was about. Like, I find her work in particular so charming, and so she just does such a great job of capturing these moments in time, which is a thing that comics do particularly well anyway. I don't know. I just think it's a perfect like artist meets medium match, and I'm really just excited to see what she'll do in the future.
Yeah, it is truly a phenomenal piece of work. So the reason that you recommended this is because of our weird shared bicultural backgrounds. So what are your feelings about the way that this book portrays diaspora relationships?
So it was a tough read at first because like I said, my culture is like double filtered for me, and I have a lot of trouble kind of forcing my family to help me connect to things that they worked so hard to discard. But Jesus Lord, like the violin thing, that opening with her playing in a church, I have done that. I have played violin in a church when we used to do Christmas recitals with my school, and my mom would always be in the aisle, always be taking video. You know, I asked her not to, and she would always then nitpick my entire performance, and it was a whole, like, that has happened to every foreign kid who plays the violin, like, guaranteed. And everybody had a Stephanie who was perfect and great, and everybody loved her and brought her flowers all the time. My Stephanie's name was Annie, and Annie is absolutely the most delightful human being I've ever spoken to. I still like keep in touch with her, so shout out shout out Annie. She was perfect and still is. She's a speech therapist now.
Tight.
Yeah, just an angel of a human being. But yeah, I think it was interesting because it is that sense of detachment, but still, like, even when you look at the friends Christine has at school, they're all from kind of a similar cultural background. They're all Asian kids or kids she knows from church. Even though they get along with, someone like Madison, who is just like the popular white blonde girl. And Moon, I think Moon's otherness is really interesting because, like you said, like, it's hard to pick up on exactly what ethnicity she is, but she's a Buddhist, and that really is not something Christine has ever encountered, even though she's constantly surrounded by other Asian people. And even Moon, when Christine's like, I've never met a Buddhist before, Moon goes, me either. So I think it's really interesting because not only are the diaspora relationships in here portrayed with such like a subtle accuracy, but the reactions of the characters they're such good foils for each other, where like Christine just tends to kind of accept and the things her parents force her to do, and then Moon is just this kind of chaos element that enters, and I think their interactions are so charming and so good. But Jen Wang has this really subtle touch where, and I mean, this is part of the reason I wanted you to read this book, is because, yeah, this is like an Asian American experience, specifically East Asian American experience that we don't have, but there's still moments of it, like even with my like Russian sort of Azerbaijani background, and I'm sure with you being like half Indian, there's just these moments that ring so true for all immigrant, like the nail polish thing. Absolutely, my stepdad used to throw fits when I would wear nail polish. There's just these moments that are so universal that I don't know, it makes the experience that can feel very lonely a little bit less lonely when you know that every other diaspora kid has gone through at least some element of it. So how did you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you really nailed it between the like weird ways that your parents get mad at you for doing stuff that they don't want you to, and like the experience of playing violin. Like, yeah, like I was also one of the millions of immigrant kids who had to play the violin in grade school. My parents were a little bit more chill. They let me quit in 7th grade, so that was tight. But like, yeah, I think the way that Jen Wang does these relationships is very true to the experience. And I will say for myself, because Singapore is a country that is deeply rooted in Chinese culture. I believe it's like 2/3 of the people in Singapore currently have some sort of Chinese background. Like, my mom does have more of a Chinese influence than an Indian influence in her life. That's sort of, I mean, I absolutely won't claim to understand what it's like to be a Chinese immigrant in the United States, but there is some sort of like cultural background noise that I experienced. Like, I think specifically there's a part where she like signs up because she does bad on a test. Christine does bad on a test and she gets a C, and like there's probably a handful of times in my life where I've gotten a C on a test and like thrown an absolute tantrum. Up into including in college, like that stuff sticks with you.
I got a 52 on my earth science lab my senior year of high school, and I never cried harder in my life. Yeah, it's brutal when you build your whole identity around letter grades. Mm-hmm.
But there's this point where she's like, oh, I need to go to these after school classes with some other kids, and I mean, that's a thing that my parents had me do, is like go to these after school classes to help learn about different types of math, or like Kumon is one of the popular ones. So like that was very specific to me. I definitely felt that. There's a point right in the beginning where it's like the first time Christine and Moon have hung out, like the Moon's mom is babysitting them basically, and Moon and Christine like go and hang out, and they talk about different stuff, and it's like, oh, okay, hey, I I'm a Buddhist, I'm a vegetarian, we're going to eat this dandan mian with mushrooms instead of pork, and then Christine at first is skeptical, but then she's like, oh, it's pretty good. And then she learns that Moon is into K-pop, and they practice dancing, and then she's very embarrassed when her dad comes home and sees her dancing. And she goes back after spending time with Moon, and she writes in her diary, and she writes what, confident, funny, and not Asian, under Moon's name. And that one really, I thought that was a very interesting and accurate way to depict the way that especially kids feel about cultural otherness, right? Because when you see somebody that looks like you but doesn't have the same like cultural touchstones or background or references, you do kind of, right, it's difficult. It's more difficult to relate to them. Like whenever I go back to Singapore, I mean, I haven't been back in like 10 years, but the last time I was back in Singapore, right, me and my cousins would make fun of me because I was the white person there. And even now, I still kind of view myself, despite the fact that I am a brown person, I always view myself through a lens of whiteness, because the way that Indians in the United States are treated, they are offered a level of privilege that is almost on par with whiteness, right? People aren't looking at me. I mean, I'm like barely 5'7" and 150 pounds. Like I'm a little dude. Like no one's gonna get threatened by me. But like people don't look at me when I walk down the street and like clutch their bags. Or they don't follow me into grocery stores and suspect I'm stealing, or they don't look at me and they're like, oh no, you're going to spread the coronavirus, right? There's a level of privilege afforded with being an Indian man in the United States that is different from basically any other immigrant group. And at the same time, right, I also have this big struggle with my identity where it's like, I don't, I've been in this lens, I've lived my whole life through this lens of Midwestern whiteness. And I'm also, this is a kind of a wild story, but so my dad, he comes from this German Catholic family. He is one of 11 children in Central Illinois, right? But he's got like 6 brothers, or he is like the 6th of 6 sons in the family. And they all look alike. Like all my uncles and and my dad, they all look the same. They all have the same mustache and like kind of balding hair that will eventually take my beautiful mane as well. And they all look the same basically. Like like anytime like my dad, like people like oh hey doctor last name, and then they'll be like oh wait no that's not me, that's my brother. And like one time when I was in a store, this woman came up to my dad and she's like, oh, hey, you're this doctor. And then my dad was like, oh no, that's my brother. And she was like, oh, okay. And then like my dad was talking with her and they were having a nice conversation. And then like later on in the store, she came up to me and she was like, oh, hey, are you Mr. Blank? And I was like, oh, haha, I get it. 'Cause you're trying to be funny. And she's like, don't worry, one day people will mistake you for your dad too. And I was like, yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem, ma'am. I didn't obviously say that to her, but it is a very strange thing to be a person of color that largely lives in a white community, that sees themselves as both a white person and not a white person, and then also to know that I'm in a relationship. I'm trying very hard to get married to a white person. We'll see what coronavirus does, but our children will probably also, they will be 3/4 white. And it's a strange thing to have to parse through, like what aspects of culture are we obligated to try to pass down, to our children? What parts of our culture are bad to pass down to our children, right? There's that point in Stargazing where like you said, Christine's dad gets very mad about Christine painting her nails, and he says like, Christine, you've got to remember that you are on a different path than Moon. And I mean, my parents didn't explicitly do any of that weird class like dynamic, but I mean, I did know the word scholarship like before I started kindergarten, right? There's always that academic focus that immigrant kids always talk about. It's a very strange thing, but it's also completely normal when you talk about it to any other immigrant child of immigrants. So yeah, I mean, do you have anything you want to talk about, specifically the way that you have, your otherness was sort of put on display here?
Well, it's funny. I think we have a very similar experience in like the way we perceive ourselves in relation to whiteness. Because had you asked me, my mom tried so hard to assimilate to the sort of, it's hard to explain because there's no concept of like quote unquote whiteness in Russian cultures as much as I understand it, but she was definitely othered for having like an Armenian accent. I had to work very, very hard to get her Armenian accent out. And then we moved here. I mean, she's white for, you know, she's Armenian, so she's not white in the, I guess, European definition of white as we understand it in America, but she is, you know, when you look at her, you're like, that's a white lady. And when you look at me, it's a question mark. It's very much like, there's something there. There's something there, and I can't tell what. And it's funny because it's exacerbated. I live in Texas now. And it's very exacerbated in Texas, where I get mistaken for Mexican all the time. And not just by white people either. Like, I got yelled at, and I'm not yelled at. Well, I got shamed. I got shamed in a Mexican restaurant for not ordering in Spanish by the waitress. And
I love that.
I blanked and I didn't know what to do, so I started speaking Russian at her, and then she got the point, and I was like, cool.
Got him. I'm glad that we both had this similar experience of not only white people thinking that we're Hispanic folks, but also Hispanic folks thinking we're Hispanic folks. Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry to disappoint everyone.
Well, it's happened to me. I was also in JCPenney once, and the cleaning lady who was she was Hispanic, she also started speaking to me in Spanish. I was like, oh no, I don't know.
Sorry, ma'am.
So sorry. And there's a Mexican grocery on the corner from where I live, where I walk sometimes to get aloe water if it's really hot out. Or as of late, I've been going there to get just like necessities, so I don't have to drive anywhere. But yeah, they also will just speak to me in Spanish. And it's partially because most of them don't speak English, and the other reason is because they also assume I will speak Spanish back to them, and I'm like, sorry.
Yeah.
Nope. Did not. Wrong brand of brown. But I have these like weird. It's funny. I was really thinking on these experiences, but I have these like little. I would have heard of them as like little heartbreaks, where I'm always like really weirdly desperate to find like a point of connection with people, and I think it's just me as a person. I grew up. This is gonna sound really sad. I grew up a really lonely kid. Like I was always really lonely.
Oh no.
I only had really acquaintances and not very many close friends until probably late middle school, high school, and then even then, honestly, I wasn't really. I don't know. I was always kind of sidelined. But same thing in college, and even now, I'm generally a pretty reserved person with a very small amount of friends, and I don't really see them all that often. But it's there was a moment I like went to see Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812 on Broadway. And it's a play based on War and Peace, which is a Russian novel. And the lady sitting next to me, I like heard her speaking Russian. And during the intermission, I turned and I said something to her. She's like, oh, isn't it like a nice show or something in Russian? And she gave me the like coldest stare I think I'd ever seen from a woman. So I just like couldn't look at her for the rest of the show.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then one time I was like dancing at a wedding. And again, like we're very Azerbaijani culturally. I was like dancing at a wedding and I thought I was doing it right, but my aunt started like making fun of me, and then not in a really productive way where she fixed whatever I was doing wrong, but she just told me I was doing it wrong. So like I can't dance at weddings anymore. And yeah, and then the kind of worst one that I literally think about this all the time. I went to CTNX, which is a cartoon expo in California. And I kept being given drinks by a Rooster Teeth recruiter who was a friend of mine, and she just kept buying me things. So it was like, cool. And I ended up pretty drunk, and I don't drink very often, so it's just, you know, when I'm drunk, I'm drunk. Like, very friendly. And I overheard this pair, not couple, but a pair, this man and a woman. They were, I believe they worked on like Rick and Morty or something. But they were speaking Russian. I started talking to them, and it's funny because like you and I talking right now, we have this very specific American bicultural experience. They were a little bit older than me. They both still had accents when they spoke English. And I started speaking to them, and it was clear that there was a disconnect. Like we shared a language, technically shared like a cultural experience, but we didn't share pretty much anything else. And I just remember the dude before they walked away, and mind you, I was like wasted. And the dude just puts his hand on my shoulder and he goes, let me give you some advice. He goes, you need to find your people.
Oh.
And that, it haunts me. It haunts me to this day. And it's such a strange experience to know that, like, whenever I call my mom or my aunt who still lives in Azerbaijan, or whenever I ask about my dad who I haven't seen in 20 years, or whenever I really do try to keep up on my Russian so that I don't get too rusty, it's weird that it gets pointed out to me how other I am, even by my own family, because I grew up in America. I moved here when I was 7. And then my little brother, like, barely speaks Russian. He was born here. My full name is like, literally means night flower of Mamad. Like, I have the most common name out of Azerbaijan. If you hear my name, you're like, that's not white. But then my brother's name is, like, very white, and he just, I don't know, he just doesn't have this, like, weird desire to be part of something that doesn't actually exist anymore. Like, the part of the culture that I want to be a part of is just not real. It's just not there. It's just that sense of family that doesn't exist anywhere anymore, and it's something that I constructed in my mind for a long time, and then just am only now really reckoning with the fact that the thing that I want is something that I made up. So I think reading this book was really just like an interesting wake-up call, because, I mean, like we said, it's a very specific East Asian experience, but it still rings so true for, like, diaspora kids. So I guess, those are my, like, little heartbreaks. Was there ever a moment in your life where because, I mean, like you said, right, you grew up kind of perceiving yourself as white, your fiance is white, you grew up in a white Midwestern community. I grew up in a white Northeastern community in Western New York. Very Rust Belty, very Polish, very German. Very, very Russian also. But was there ever a moment in your life where you felt like a need or a pull to figure out more about specifically, like, where your mom came from, or the need to sort out kind of what the cultural influences that she brought to you are, that, like you said, that you would keep?
I can think of two major instances. The first is when I was in the 2nd grade, and we were doing, like, a math game, and there was one of my friends, an Asian man, and I remember what it was, because I couldn't remember what 7 times 6 was, and, like, we were racing, and I was playing against him, and he got it, and no, it wasn't 7 times 6, it was 8 times 7, because that's 56, and he was like, well, of course I got it, I'm Asian, Asians are smart, and I was like, oh, huh. And then that sort of set me down this path of, like, I guess I'm sort of Asian. I guess I should also try to be smart. And then we go through the whole experience of being steeped in Midwestern culture for, I don't know, 10 more years. And then I get to college, and I meet my first roommate, who became, like, my only roommate besides the person I live with now, who's my fiance. And He's a Muslim man from I mean he's also mixed. His mom is white and his dad is from Bangladesh, but he, like, fully identifies as a Bangladeshi, and like he had such a greater grasp of his father's culture, and like, I mean, he could speak Arabic, and he can read it and write it, and I mean, he's also, like, kind of a brilliant dude, but the way that he understood his own culture and had a greater grasp on, like, the who he was quote unquote supposed to be, that I was like, oh, maybe I should interrogate more fully the other aspect of my life, which is my mom's, which is weird though, because not quite to the extent that your mom did, but my mom didn't necessarily, I mean, she would always cook us Chinese and Indian meals, but that was really the extent of it. Like, we didn't have lessons to learn Mandarin or Malayali. Like, my mom was also extremely busy. I mean, she worked as a journalist for almost my entire childhood. So like she didn't have time to like really pass down all of her, cultural touchstones. And I'm not sure that she wanted to, because I mean, she worked so hard to come to the United States. She wanted to, be fully seen as an American. And, every once in a while she'll like tell me stories about how people treated her badly because she wasn't white. And I was just like, God, I kind of get that need to assimilate. And that's where I'm at now. That's once I left college and started interrogating what my identity was beyond academia. I don't remember what I was saying. Basically something about how I've been more interrogating my identity after leaving college, and that's sort of where I'm at now, which is why I'm trying to talk to more people with similar backgrounds like you, trying to piece together what bicultural identity actually means in the year of our Lord 2020.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, because my mom is really similar. She used to tell me stories where there were signs on like apartment buildings in Moscow that said, won't rent to like people of Azerbaijani or Armenian descent. So she had to really, really fight to assimilate to that landscape, and then really fight to assimilate to this one. And I know she's always really self-conscious about her accent. She's really self-conscious about her vocabulary. Mind you, this woman works in a hospital. She's been here for 20 years. Like, she's perfectly understandable. And I feel really bad, because I used to get really frustrated with her when I was younger, when she would ask me to translate a bunch of stuff. And like, obviously I have a clearer understanding of how uncomfortable and humiliating not being able to just have a conversation is now, that I maybe didn't have in middle school. But it's tough, because you leave college, or you have these moments where you meet these people that are just so self-assured in everything that they do, and they have such a clear understanding of who they are culturally and where they come from, and it kind of shocks you into this desire to kind of understand how your strange cultural experiences apply to your own life. And I think Moon is like a really good illustration of that, in the sense that she never really thinks about her Asianness in the same way that Christine does. Like, she never really interrogates it, but she's always comfortable in knowing like, hey, I'm Asian. These are the Asian foods that I eat. This is my Asian mom. This is the Asian music that I listen to. And then she never, like Christine, tries to fit herself into a box that is someone else's understanding of Asian. While I have multiple times in my life been confronted with trying to fit myself into a box that is somebody else's understanding of what a Russian person should be. Because like you said, there's those moments in like middle school where someone's like, oh, well, you're blank, so you should be blank. And then you try to fit that, or see if you need to fit that, or interrogate it in some way. And it's a difficult and strange experience, but I think, and I don't know how you feel now, but it's one of those things where you have to navigate it very, very carefully, and you're probably better equipped to navigate it as an adult when you have a little bit more of a grasp on like not only your personality, but also you're not as easily influenced by 13-year-olds telling you what you should be. And I'm much more prone to telling people to fuck off nowadays when they make some strange assumption about who I should be. I think going all the way back to the fact that this is a book for children, I think it's important to sometimes read, especially as writers, because you also write and are steeped in like a creative universe, I think more than you assume. But I think it's important for us to go back and to maybe engage with content that's made for younger audiences, not only from a craft standpoint, but also for just to see like, well, you have to speak to children in these very honest, these very open but kind of simplified terms. Is there anything in there that we can go back to that isn't this like overwrought adult thinking that's burdened by 20 years of like expectations and strange thinking in circles? Because you wake up in a cold sweat thinking about whatever. Children don't quite have that yet, so how can you interrogate these problems through that lens? Which is why I thought this book would be a good pick for both of us, because I think it's definitely led to like a very interesting conversation, because as I kind of expected, there is a very similar experience there, despite the fact that you're an half Indian American who grew up in the Midwest, and I'm like a weird mutt that grew up in in the Northeast, but there's still that really, really kind of intimate overlap in the desire to understand and apply culture that we don't know really a lot about through the only vehicle that we have, which is our mothers, who are reluctant to do much of the applying because they worked so hard to assimilate to something else. Yeah, it's just incredibly fascinating. And before I got laid off last summer, I had been planning on taking a trip back to Azerbaijan and hanging out with my aunt for a little while and just seeing what's going on. But I mean, you kind of touched on this earlier. Are there parts of the culture that you explicitly already know you would not want to kind of pass on to a future generation? And do you think that changes the essence of what you're trying to understand at all?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely as we see in this book, there is a pernicious grasp of class and like a person's standing in life that pervades a lot of Asian thinking, including my own, where that like if you get good grades and you do the right extracurriculars and you go to a good college, you deserve whatever comes to you, and anybody who doesn't do that, well, they didn't do good enough in school. I still struggle with seeing people who admit they did bad in high school. I will still go, why are you more successful than me? And that's kind of a shitty way to think, and I'm working on that. So that's definitely something I don't know that I would want to pass down. I still think that I would, be pretty hard on my kids about school. I don't know. It is so hard to tell, right? Because I've been working in a school for the past 2 years, and the thing about kids is that they, as much as you want to be able to shape them, they will also sort of carve their own path, despite your best interests. And you can only sort of like, you can't steer the boat. You can just sort of like, try to turn the sails as much as you can. Is there anything, I don't know what your feelings about children are, but do you have any sort of, cultural background that you would want to be able to pass to your kids should you want them?
Yeah, I don't plan on ever having my own children. I wouldn't mind adopting. Those are kind of my general feelings. And I've always felt like this, Mom, you don't have to fight with me again about this. Literally the most intense fights we ever have are like, I don't want kids, and she loses her mind. But yeah, for me it's something similar. Like, I also have that reflex of like, oh no, you did shitty in high school, why are you doing better than me? And it is truly just a reflex. Like, it's just the way we were taught to think, and the fact that we've caught ourselves doing it and are working on not being that shitty is a good thing. It means that you're taking these influences of being young and dumb and impressionable and formed by your surroundings, and like you said, turning the sails on your own path. Like, you have a much higher degree of self-determination that I think is assumed when we're growing up. For me, I think it's definitely that, and then also the sexism would really, really like to, yeah. There's a lot, there's a lot of sexism where I come from, and it's very like my mom does it, and it's very internalized and crazy. I think the sexism and homophobia, I think I could really, really do to not pass down. I think the funniest example of of the sexism is, so I'm sure there's a similar understanding. I'm from both the German and the not German parts of your family, but generally speaking, hospitality is kind of key to a lot of foreigners. So I remember I was in high school, and my friend who, speaking of intense middle school friendships, my friend Josh, who I'm still friends with, I became friends with in literally middle school. He was over, and this kid's like family to us at this point. Like, we've been friends for 8 years. He was over all the time. We're incredibly good friends. We're still good friends. And my mom needed to bring something down to the basement, like some boxes full of, I don't know, something heavy. And because Josh is a guest in the home, I did it myself. I got up, I took the boxes, I brought them down, and my mom just lost it. She was like, why did you make the boys do it? I was like, they're guests. And she's like, but you're a girl. I'm like, so are you. You picked it up. It was just little stuff like that where her, and but mind you, my mom is like a twice divorced, like completely independent woman. She's gone through a lot of shit in her life. It's crazy that she thinks like this sometimes, but yeah, she's always I think she's concerned that I'm too independent and like good at things, and that like me knowing how to use a hammer is gonna prevent me from getting a husband. And I'm like, ooh, shocker, the thing that's gonna prevent me from getting a husband is my unpleasant personality. Not the fact that I can put a picture up wherever I want on the wall. So
I think the ways that our parents have very strange beliefs to us, I think that shows even in this book, is sort of like their defense mechanisms, right? That they've had to see and live through so much stuff that like the weird things that we sort of scoff at, they only believe them because of like some very intense experiences that they've had in their own lives. So
for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I know for a fact my mom had some really intense experiences in her life, and I only know because she will occasionally, like, we'll be having dinner and she'll just like drop like a traumatic story on me, and then like she was in the or affected by, oh God, I already forgot the name of the war, but it was a war that took place in Azerbaijan in the late 80s to 1994, and I was born in 93. And she was like, yeah, so you know, the Azerbaijani people came around this like Armenian neighborhood that I lived in with like bats with nails on them, and my dad sent me upstairs to go be with the neighbor, and the next morning I just remember walking out and everything was gray. And then she like finishes the story and basically is like, I thought my family was dead, and I was like just staring there with my jaw on the floor. And she's like, maybe I'm a little traumatized from that. I'm like, yeah, I think you probably are, Mom. Maybe go to therapy.
Yup.
So it's funny that they have these really intense experiences, and then the things they choose to pass down to us are just so like weird and foreign and funny to us, even though they make sense in the context of their lives. But do you have this like weird do you have these weird moments where you understand your parents or people with aspects of lives that we don't know about or understand?
Yeah, I remember like when I was in second grade, I was being a real shit because like I don't know, I was like arguing with my mom about something, and I just remember like I started seeing her crying because she was like getting so frustrated, and I was like, oh my God, oh no, my mom's a person, fuck. And like there are just some times where I'm just like, oh no, I've been terrible to my parents, and I want to die.
Haven't we all? Oh, here's a question I really wanted to ask you. Do you ever have that, do you have older siblings?
No, I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest.
Like you.
Okay.
But I have a younger sibling like you.
It's a brother, sister?
She is I have a little sister.
Okay.
Who's actually Russian, ironically.
Oh, hey!
She's adopted, yep.
Hey, привет. Did you... Okay, so if she's adopted, I think I might change okay. Anyway, did you ever have the privilege of being the first son in a Brown family?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I still am to a large degree. Like, there's a lot of resentment I have towards my sister about, like, the things she can get away with that I never would have been able to get away with my parents. And still, to a large extent, am not. Like, I will still catch stuff. I'll catch shit for things that my sister's, like, actively doing. And I'll be like, hey, Mom, what the fuck?
Oh, that's interesting.
Dad, why are you being like this?
Interesting. You found it restrictive.
Uh-oh. What is your experience?
Oh, because my brother is the first son in a foreign family, and he gets away with fucking murder.
I see.
I was on lockdown in compared to him. And I mean, I got away with a bunch of shit, but compared to him, I was on lockdown. Oh my God. No, that's so interesting, because everyone I talk to, a good friend of mine is married to the oldest son in a very Indian family, and he gets away with fucking everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, right, there's a weird gender dynamic in specifically like Southeast Asian relationship specific. There's a weird way that Indian men are treated as opposed to Indian women. But that is not something that carried over to yours truly. I think I got a pretty standard firstborn child treatment in that, and that my family's hopes and dreams were on my shoulders, and I have let them down to various extents. But that's just how it be sometimes.
What was their dream career for you?
Oh, I don't know. The first thing I ever wanted to be was like a paleontologist, because I loved dinosaurs, because I was 3 at once. And I mean, dinosaurs still rule, but I remember my dad, like, I was like, oh, I kind of want to be a lawyer. And my dad gave me a high five. And I was like, oh, my dad has shown affection. He's proud of me. This is new. So like there's a bit where I wanted to be like a judge, or like a justice basically. And then there's a bit where I wanted to be in the army, and everyone was mad at me for that. That's a whole other thing that we cannot get into right now. But yeah, my weird career path is a whole other podcast. But yeah, my parents were, I would say, relatively calm compared to a lot of the experiences of Middle Eastern families. Like, there was a phase where I wanted to do music, and my dad was like, you should probably not do that. But besides that, my family has generally been supportive of everything that I wanted to be, which is I'm grateful for to this day.
Yeah, I had a really similar...
But I want to hear your experience, because as someone who is like a professional artist, I'm sure it was not fun.
I had an actually strikingly similar experience. TLDR, I grew up in a kind of unpleasant situation with my mom and my stepdad, and my mom was always pretty good about, by virtue of my stepdad being bad, my mom was always more keen on letting me do whatever I wanted, in the sense that I got to have a goth phase.
Oh, tight.
Yeah, I got to like wear the chain arm warmers from Hot Topic, and my mom was like, it's just a phase. And she was correct. And then I grew back into it. Well, not the chain arm warmers, but I am truly trying to embody the goth once more.
I've seen your Instagram. Yeah, I get it.
Anyway, yeah, I wear a lot of black. Anyway, so it's just one of those things where I also my mom always wanted me to be a doctor. And then my weird career trajectory was like, I wanted to be, I don't even remember. I think right when I was in 3rd grade, I was like, I want to be an artist. And then, again, you get that sort of like, maybe you shouldn't. And then I wanted to be a teacher, which my parents were not fans of. And then I wanted to be a journalist, which my parents were not fans of. And then I was like, I don't fucking know, which they also were not fans of. And then I saw Princess and the Frog in 2009, and I was like, no, I want to be an artist. And then my parents were like, fucking fine, I guess.
Just pick something.
Yeah, just fucking please do it. And so I ended up going to art school, which is a thing I regret, and that's, again, a whole other podcast. And now I am the professional artist, and I worked professionally full-time as an artist, and then I got laid off, so now I'm a communications professional who freelances on the side, and hopefully will freelance full-time in the next couple of years. But yeah, it's funny because my mom was always supportive until the moment. She's supportive, but there's because she's an immigrant. Actually, I don't know if you've ever had similar experiences with a language barrier, but I sometimes have trouble explaining to my mom what exactly it is I want to do, because the concepts that I'm trying to explain to her don't exist in Russian. So I was like, oh, I want to be an art director for video games. And she's like, what?
What does that
mean? And I'm like, a manager for drawings, Mom. And she's like, okay. And then she like picked up her hands as if she was holding like a Nintendo, like Super Nintendo controller, and like air pressed buttons, and gave me this like weird look. And she was like, for like video games. I was like, please don't make me explain the entire AAA gaming industry or the indie gaming industry to you, please.
Oh, good. Yeah, no. By virtue of the British, my mom's like, I think her first language is actually English.
Oh shit.
So, yeah, she speaks British English. Like for a long time, it took me a while to realize that a large part of my childhood, my mom was calling me idiotic instead of idiotic, which I thought was a completely different word. But besides that, no, no language barrier.
You know what's funny is my mom. I didn't realize she had like a strange experience with otherness too, but I don't think she speaks like Armenian or Azerbaijan. One of the ones she doesn't speak one of those languages, and it always kind of leaves her out of some conversations because our when we have family gatherings, like there's 6 languages happening at all times. So, but yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, oh god, it's so funny that though, your parents, generally speaking, parents want the best for you. Like if in a majority of cases your parents want the best for you, but the way they go about it is just so funny. It's so much projecting onto this like little person of the things you wanted to do.
That's the thing that I'm most afraid of being a parent, is that I will look at this child and be like, I need you to fulfill my broken dreams for me, kid. I know you're like 6, but listen, you got a lot of work to do.
Well, not to tie this back to Boruto, but considering our earlier conversation,
it all comes back to Boruto.
It literally does. A Serato Uchiha Stan account is going to be my Twitter name for a very long time. But I mean, when we talk about media about children, right? So Stargazing, Boruto, even Prince and the Dressmaker, even I guess not Kill la Kill so much, but do you think a fair element of parents projecting their dreams onto their children? Like, I'm not sure Naruto ever did. It didn't really feel like any of the parents were projecting their dreams onto their children. And is that something that is a virtue of, do you think, either, I hate to say this, lazy writing on some scale, or maybe a desire to show a model of a parent that doesn't do that? Like, does it, because I know Jen Wang kind of in Stargazing, her parents do, or Christine's parents do project a little bit, but like Moon's mom doesn't necessarily. So
yeah.
Do we think that was, of all the other things we talked about so far, do we think that that's been purposefully excluded, or just is kind of the writers just like didn't think about it? And it's like a very meta question.
I think it's more, yeah, no, I think it's more intentional. I think, and not necessarily intentional in that they thought about including it and didn't include it, but that I think it's actually generational. I think that we are getting to a point where we realize that the ways that parents raise their children, does influence them sometimes negatively. And I think we are trying to, at least in media, portray parents as people who are more supportive of their kids and not necessarily trying to do those things. I don't know exactly, various media art forms, have different cultural backgrounds and are produced in different places. But I think in general, there is a trend toward parents being supportive, because, at least until, the past like 5 years, it seemed like the human society was like going in a decent trajectory. And like we had room for, exploring the things that you wanted to do instead of just like fighting to survive. So I think it is an intentional, choice not to have a parent project their own dreams and desires onto a kid, unless, they're actually trying to write a story about that, like in Stargazing.
I think that's a fair. I think I'm very focused on that kind of stuff because the as we mentioned, the comic I am writing is very focused on parents projecting their dreams into their children. So
yeah,
it's just something I think about a lot. Even though I think I'm very grateful for the fact that my mom was never really like that. I think she just wanted me to be successful. She never really projected her broken dreams onto me. She's generally a pretty chill lady, generally. But yeah, did you like the book?
Oh yeah, it was great. It was really good. I mean, for being so short and, for having, not as much text as like a 500-page novel, it conveyed the characters and story and themes like extremely efficiently.
And I think there was a question from the outline that we didn't really get to, but I'm curious to hear your answer. Do you identify more with Christine or Moon?
I mean, definitely Christine, as somebody who's like grappling with identity, but also saddled with like a weird, class aspiration background. Definitely Christine.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. You're definitely, at least in middle school, is very much like I'm a Christine that I think grew into a moon.
That sounds right.
Yeah, it was a very an interesting upbringing, but yeah. Do you have any last thoughts? Any closing wisdom?
I liked the part from the afterword, where Jen Wang says like she's writing about how the story of Moon is like loosely based on her as a child, and the ways that she navigated through her own weird cultural feelings, and she writes, quote, "If I wasn't like the other Asian American kids, who was I supposed to be like?" And that is a question that I think that I will probably be like working through for the rest of my life, and it was nice to see that articulated.
Yeah, I agree. There was a moment in high school where the other Russian kids came up to me, and one of the ones was just like, "Hey, why do we never see you at Russian church?" And it's a moment that haunts me, because again, if I wasn't like the other Russian kids, what are you supposed to be like? Yeah, I agree. I think that was a very a sticky moment. It sticks to the bones.
Yeah, there's those ones. I don't know how you feel about the Marvel movies, but there is a scene in my favorite one, which is Captain America: Civil War, where Bucky, Captain America's boyfriend, is fighting Iron Man, and Iron Man is all mad because Bucky killed his mom, and Iron Man's like, "Do you even remember them?" And Bucky's like, "I remember all of them," meaning all of the assassinations he's been secretly forced to do. And I feel like that quote spoke to me, and every time I experience a microaggression or terrible shitty thing, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna have to put that into my therapy diary.
that is not where I thought that story was going.
No, but I did make a tweet about it, so
it's very good. Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic journey you just took me on. Thank you.
I'm glad. All right. Do you want to plug your places where people can find you and your projects?
Yeah, so I'm at Leylses, at Leylses on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and I write a comic called Astral Heart. It's astralheartcomic.com. It's about, like I kind of said, family trauma, and it's also a wonderful romance.
And I'm at Aaron S on YouTube and Aaron SXL on Twitter, or you can find me just tweeting through the apocalypse. I don't know exactly what next week's recommendation is gonna be. I did wanna do Abzu. We'll see as far as like books go, because I don't want to make you read either Steel Crow Saga or Gideon the Ninth, because they're huge books, but they're also.
I do own Gideon the Ninth though.
Okay, if you own you're gonna love Gideon. I don't think you can read it in a week because it's a big book, but I promise you'll love it. It's so good.
I do have a big freelance test this week, so nope, can't do it.
Yeah, but, we'll talk off mic about what we can fit in your schedule.
Ooh, so it'll be a mystery for our 20 listeners.
Ooh.
All right,
20 might be overestimating it.
It's just us checking the metrics. So cool. We'll tweet about it when we figure it out.
We don't have a sign off yet. Well, bye.
Bye.